Hey everybody, I'm joined by Leah Kopke, who is a fantastic 3D freelance motion designer with over a decade of experience. Specifically, she has strong experience in visual development around packaging, interior design, and product development. So it's really awesome to talk to you as well. You also run your own YouTube channel called Ambient 3D Animations, where you give back to the community in the form of Cinema 4D tutorials. I personally have seen these appear on my LinkedIn several times, and each time I watch them, I walk away with new knowledge about a feature within Cinema 4D that I really just didn't know about. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. So let's just start from the beginning. You have over a decade of experience. Where did it all start?
So that's a good question. I originally went to University of Cincinnati to get my Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design. And in that program, we do 5 semesters of full-time internships. So I graduated at that point with already about 2 years of experience in industrial design. And then from there, one of the companies that I worked at was DGS Retail after I graduated. And they did a lot of retail fixtures, and I started doing a lot of rendering for them. And I started rendering their products within environments. So I really loved doing that. And my sister was actually the one who brought up to me that I should learn Cinema 4D and 3D animation. So I took some courses at School of Motion, and I absolutely loved it. So from that, I knew that I wanted to do 3D motion design, and I was trying to figure out how to get into that. So I initially asked my work if they needed that, and they didn't need it at the time. So I made the really hard decision to jump into freelancing. And I've been doing it ever since then. So it's a little over 3 years I've been freelancing full time. About a year into freelancing, I was hired by School of Motion as a TA because they had actually seen some of my tutorials online, and they said that was an interest to them when they saw my resume and saw that I did have some experience explaining how things work. And this was actually before I had started covering 3D modeling tools as a podcast. I was just posting some tutorials at that time. And I didn't expect it to help me find that job, but I really enjoyed it. And I did that for about 2 years. I was a student mentor for them. I loved it, gained a lot of incredible experience working with everyone there. It was a part-time job. I loved it. And now I'm still freelancing. I do a lot of work for architects, construction contractors to help visualize spaces, as well as visualizing products and how they work and go together. And my experience with industrial design, I think, helped me find a niche later on in 3D motion design because I work a lot with engineers and I really enjoy it.
That's awesome. And that's such a cool story. Did you do Basecamp? Was that the one you did?
Yeah. So I took Cinema 4D Basecamp, Cinema 4D Ascent, and I also took After Effects Kickstart.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember going through Basecamp as well. And there's a lot of really awesome information in there. I really felt like it really fast-tracked me on my end, being able to understand Cinema 4D. I don't get to use it, unfortunately, anymore. But that's awesome that you end up taking the leap of faith. And it seems from my end that it's working out really well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worked out very well for me. I love doing this, and I like that freelancing gives me some more control over my schedule so that I can dedicate time to learning as well as working and have more control over my schedule in that way. So it's been a wonderful experience. I really love it.
Let's jump into kind of the freelance path of getting into visualizing spaces. When did it start? Kind of what inspired you to jump specifically into that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It really began when I was at DGS Retail because I was visualizing a lot of grocery stores. We did a lot of renders and we sold a lot of product to grocery stores, and I began 3D modeling those grocery stores and rendering them for clients while I was working there. And then later on, I started thinking about it more and wanting to find a niche in that even more because I really love doing those types of renders. So I decided to really push my business more in that direction and start doing more of that, both residential and commercial spaces. And it grew from there. I also recently had a booth at the Chicago Build Expo, and I really loved doing that. It was really interesting to meet more architects and construction contractors. So I really enjoyed it.
I saw the information about you being at the expo. One of the really fascinating things about it was that you were there representing yourself as a freelance business. And I feel like that is such a unique activity. I don't know if it's specific to the industry you're in. I don't know if it's just something that you feel like, hey, any freelancer should be doing this. But what did you find were the benefits of being at an expo and representing yourself?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The idea actually came from going to a lot of networking events. And I felt like while I was talking to people and introducing myself, it was very hard to explain exactly what I do because what I do is so visual and it's a form of visual communication where I felt like part of my message or experience was being lost in just conversation. So I think I really wanted to have a television showing my work on it. And that was where the idea originally came from, was if you get a booth at a expo or a trade show, then you can choose to bring a television and really show your work. And that was really helpful. And I think that it went really well. I enjoyed it. So that's where the idea came from. Our industry is changing and evolving. And it's good to try out a lot of different ways of marketing to see what works. And maybe what worked 3 years ago doesn't work now. So I'm always trying new things and experimenting and seeing what works and learning from it.
So now the follow-up question is, what do you feel like is like, how do you feel like is the best way to market yourself right now?
Oh, that's a good question. I found for me, the best way to market myself is really talking to people one-on-one. And I think that's a good introduction. And I think another part to that is being able to have a good portfolio and show your work. And also having a presence online. I think it helps people remember you. After you have maybe that in-person introduction, it helps to be continually in their feed so that they remember you and reach out.
Did you feel like you got strong leads from having a booth at the expo?
I do. I think that it was a great experience and I met a ton of incredible people through it. And I'm really excited to see how that helps my business grow. I feel good about the experience.
Good. Yeah, that's exciting. And you know what? I hope you absolutely do land some strong gigs from that, especially, you know, putting yourself out there, which I feel like for a lot of people can be very hard to do. So, you know, super congrats to you for doing that. Rock on. I did see on your LinkedIn banner that I believe you had for the expo an organizer banner. Were you a part of putting all of it together?
So they gave all the exhibitors banners that say an organizer. So by organizing a booth, that's the title they give you for putting your business there and showing what you can do. So that was how I originally got to have that banner. For
the expo, did you find yourself finding the most value from staying at your booth? Were there micro events at the expo that you're like, hey, you know, I have to go to this? Did you go to other people's booths? What was kind of like, ultimately, what did you find was the most value from those activities? This
is my first year actually having a booth there, but I actually went the year before and walked around because I wanted to gain experience of what it was like being there before getting a booth. I was thinking about it at the time. And I remember they had a networking hub there, and I think that was very helpful. And I got to talk with a lot of architects there and a lot of other people in the business who were there to network and maybe had their own business as well. And that was a great experience. And that was actually one of the times when I was at a networking event and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could just show my work to people on a screen? Because people might not know what to expect and visualize what 3D motion design could mean for how it could help their business. So it's really nice to be able to show an example.
I love that. And it's awesome that you essentially scoped it out a year before to see like, hey, is this valuable? Is it not? Things like that, and really immerse yourself in it. That's awesome. So we're going to pivot a little bit here. On that note of getting leads and so forth, what is your favorite project you've ever worked on?
Ooh, that's a hard question. That is a hard question. Favorite project? I have a couple of them. One of them that I really enjoyed was doing work for an air compressor company, Fluid Air Dynamics. I had the opportunity to do a few videos for them showing how their products work and go together, and I really enjoyed that. There's also some spaces that I have gotten the chance to render. I wish that I could tell you about them, but they're under NDA. But it's been a really fun experience also working on rendering out those spaces.
And I definitely understand the NDA. Unfortunately, I feel like all of our best work is just tucked away behind NDAs, which is so unfortunate, but it is what it is, right?
It is what it is. And yeah, but I just had a fun experience. And I think that's the most important part, is enjoying the process, whether or not if you can show it at the end of it, just enjoying the process and getting to know the company and the people there is really rewarding.
On your website, you list that when someone is going to be working with you, you like to sit down with them and kind of understand what is their brand, what are their goals, and so forth. And I want to dive a little bit into that, specifically around what do you believe is the value behind that versus just ultimately saying, yes, I'll take the money and I'll do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to get to know your clients, because they're experts in their own business. They're experts in what they do. And oftentimes when I jump into a project, I'm actually learning while I go. I wasn't an expert in air compressors before I started having to animate and show how their piping systems worked. So I think that approaching every project with a little bit of curiosity helps you do your job better, because that way you can really visualize and understand their goals and have that show in your work. I think it helps your customer be happier with the end product, because they can see more of themselves and their company in that, as well as their goals.
Does sitting down with them and doing that level of learning, has that ever put you in a position where you essentially had to turn away a potential client?
I don't think that that's a really good question. I don't think that I've had to turn away a client from that initial phase of learning about their business. Sometimes we'll do a follow-up where we find that we need to learn or talk about a little bit more, or I even meet them in person to see what the project will be in person before I start it. So I think it more often leads to more conversations rather than having to walk away. When
you're having those conversations, are there any kind of objections that you commonly hear from those potential clients?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a really good question. I think that one of my largest challenges has been showing what I can do. I remember I had this problem both while I was working as an industrial designer and as a 3D motion designer, and navigating it was difficult. I remembered having interviews with companies or even potential clients earlier in my career. This isn't really a problem anymore, but earlier in my career, I'd sit down and talk with people, and they were not convinced that the work I was showing in my portfolio I had done, or if I could really do that, or if I did the whole project. And building that credibility, I think when you are starting out, is hard for anyone. And that was definitely something I ran into. So the way I had overcome that was actually, I had started showing how I worked. I realized that it wasn't enough for people to see what was in my portfolio. They needed to see the process. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I started doing tutorials, as you can see on YouTube. And I was doing that for a while, even before I had started my podcast. So it's been a while that I've been posting videos. And I think that really helped me build credibility. It opened up other doors for work for me, including being a student mentor for a period of time. So that was definitely the largest challenge for me, was showing what I could do and communicating that well.
I find that so fascinating in the sense that I do imagine that you're working oftentimes with engineers or alongside them. And I definitely feel, having worked with engineers before, that it's a very like fact-driven environment. Like you said, I mean, just overcome, like you have to be able to show like the process, because it's almost like you have to back up everything that you suggest or say, because it's like challenged constantly in a way. Is that fair to say?
That's a really good question. I'm thinking about it. I think that there is a different communication style between artists and while you're speaking with an engineer. I think that it is very, very fact-driven what they do, and there's a lot of specifics. I remember I even worked on a project once that was for surgical equipment, and they'd ask for changes that were just a couple of millimeters to make sure that it looked accurate. So I think that there's a lot of accuracy, and it is about being very fact-based. So I think that the largest challenge is just asking the right questions so that you make sure that you're showing what they are trying to communicate in the video or the render that you're doing for them. So I think it's a matter of communication and asking the right questions. And that's what I've realized, at least for myself.
Have you ever had any challenges with working with clients in the engineering side when you're using Cinema 4D? I'm only speaking because, anecdotally speaking, I've worked with engineers in the past, and it was like sometimes they'd use SketchUp, sometimes they would use like a CAD program or something like that, and so oftentimes we'd have questions with each other around like, hey, are the measurements correct because I'm working in a different program, things like that. Or there's typically a perception that Cinema 4D is more of a motion design 3D program, not one for modeling at times.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in recent years, Cinema 4D actually made it possible to import SolidWorks files. And SolidWorks is probably the most commonly used 3D modeling software for manufacturers. So a lot of times I'll work with the SolidWorks file or even ask for a step file, which is pretty universal. It exports out pretty easily from software like SolidWorks, and it's easily imported into Cinema 4D. As far as construction goes, I've received FBX files that I could use and work with when it comes to architecture and building. So I think that there's enough file options where even when you're working in between software, you can find something that will work for both sides, even if we're working in different software.
I love that. I actually did not know Cinema 4D worked with SolidWorks files or general CAD files. So that's new to me. I was working in Blender at the time when I would take on those kind of projects. And one of the things that we'd find is like when we would receive the files, because it's transferring from a CAD and we'd have to transfer it over to a different file type, whether it be FBX or something, the faces on the models would get like really janky at times, or you get like really flipped normals and things like that. Did you also experience that?
Yeah, I've definitely run into that too. And a lot of times I'll use tools like the remesh tool or make some little adjustments to the actual SolidWorks files or step files in order to make them appropriate for animation. Because a lot of times what works for maybe manufacture or engineering drawings doesn't work for animation. It's not the right topology, you can't use it. But there's some really good tools inside of Cinema 4D that make it possible to adjust those. So the remesh tool is my best friend when it comes to working with those, and it's very helpful.
I love Cinema 4D's remesh because I believe it's based off, it's like a offshoot of ZRemesher from ZBrush, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I love how it's able to really retain a lot of the quads, or I guess generate, because it's not retaining them, it's generating a bunch of quads, and does a really good job with that. Versus another software like Blender, where it's almost like you have to fight the remesher a whole bunch just to get it to do a good job of like keeping edges and things like that. So that's awesome. I'm already learning something. I haven't even watched the tutorial today from you. I've already learned something, so I appreciate that. But let's jump over to ambient 3D animations. What got you inspired ultimately to create that channel?
So that's a good question. It actually started off without there even being tutorials on it. I created it during the pandemic. It seemed like a really stressful time, and I became interested in creating relaxing animations. I started doing fireplace animations and things like that just to have something comforting playing on your television, because I like something playing in the background, whether if I'm cleaning or working or doing anything. And I've always found that really comforting. So I thought that would be comforting for other people too. So I started doing those animations. And then later on that evolved to more tutorials, because I was trying to build credibility for my business at the time. And as I became more interested in learning Cinema 4D, I started looking online because I wanted to find someone who was selling videos that explained all the 3D modeling tools for Cinema 4D, because that's what I wanted to learn at the time. And I remembered that was how I learned software like SolidWorks back when I was doing more industrial design work. And I remembered being able to watch those videos and learn each tool and how wonderful that was and how much that helped me. And I just didn't see anything exist like that for Cinema 4D. So I thought maybe I can learn it myself and then teach other people and create those videos. So I started reading the manual to learn all the 3D modeling tools and trying them out and teaching myself. And then after I taught myself how to do it, I would then record the tutorial and teach others how to do it, because I think a lot of artists are visual learners, and it's very hard for most people to learn by just reading the manual. And it's even a little bit challenging for me, but I also find the process so rewarding once you figure it out and understand it and can help someone else.
That's awesome. Especially because you really, it seemed like you went out, you tried to find a solution for something, you couldn't find it, and you said, okay, well, I'll just make the solution myself. You're transferring that information from manuals, because I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think a lot of people want to read manuals, especially not anymore. So you're absolutely right. It's like visual learning, see what happens, replicating it, things like that. And one of the things I really like about your channel is how it feels like a pretty strong divide between exploring features within Cinema 4D that most people aren't going to have known about probably, but then also doing tutorials in regards to like project tutorials like the fidget cube that you did. And it's really awesome because I feel like sometimes some channels can end up leading one or two ways. They're either going to do nothing but like, hey, here's how I do a simulation, here's the tools, whatever. And then other channels might go, hey, we're going to show you how to recreate something, but you're not really going to know how to transfer it over to your daily work or something like that. So I really love your channel for that reason, because I feel like it's the best of both worlds, and you can go and learn something that you can really apply to your everyday, but then you also have exercises as well that you can follow along and then couple with the other tutorials you have to then really just absolutely maximize what you learned and bring that to your projects. So jumping into the channel a little bit more, what is your workflow like when you're creating your videos and, just scheduling them out?
That's a good question. So I think that I've had to learn to be really flexible when it comes to the videos, because my first priority is I need to make a living and I need to do client work. So that's my first priority, and that needs to be my first priority. After that would be my YouTube channel. So it's a lot of moving things around in my schedule and seeing pockets of time that I could spend either reading the manual or writing down ideas for what future episodes could be. And going off of the manual, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll look up all the 3D modeling tools within a chapter. I'll write them all on Post-it notes, and then I'll rearrange those Post-it notes in the order in which I think makes sense to cover a topic, so that I know what order the episode should go in. And sometimes one tool will build off of knowledge maybe in another tool, so it makes more sense to have one come before or after another. So it's a lot of I love Google Calendar. It lets me move things around and readjust them because life happens and schedules change. So it gives me that flexibility to decide I'm doing this part of the process this day instead of at this time because this came up and this needs to come first.
That's awesome that you do physical Post-it notes. Essentially, kind of like do your framework that way. Is there a specific reason why you do that? Is it just like a design thinking mentality or something?
Yeah. So I think I originally started using Post-it notes in college. We learned it as a method for brainstorming ideas. And I really like how you can move them around and rearrange them. And I'll actually stick them to the wall of my office. And that gives me the flexibility to move them around. Sometimes I'll change my mind about which episode should come when, and I can just move them around and rearrange them so that I know what's coming along. And it's always visually there for me to reference when I forget what the plan was. I can just look over to my wall and remember. So I find that really helpful.
Some people get really particular about their brand for Post-it notes or like the specific type of Post-it notes to use. Do you have like a preferred brand, or do you have like a color system you typically do with your Post-it notes?
That's a good question. Right now, I don't have a particular brand. I have a bunch of different ones. I have these over here, and they're fun. I used to have all the different colors in the rainbow, but as you can see that I've used up a lot of them, so there's fewer colors, but I'll use any Post-it note I can find, any piece of paper I can find. I think the plain ones are nice because they leave you more room for writing. And sometimes I'll not just write what the episode is. I'll write down notes of what I need to do for it on the Post-it note. So it's really nice that it gives that extra space. So I'd say just a plain Post-it note works. And if it doesn't stick on your wall well, I'll also use sticky putty to stick it onto the wall if it isn't sticking well enough to stay up there until I get to the episode. So it's usually what I do.
If it works, right?
It definitely does. So I'm happy with it.
Do you have any tips for anybody who is looking to start their own tutorial channels or create just tutorial videos in general?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to do is to pick a topic that you'd be interested enough in order to continue talking about, because I'm getting close to 97. Next week will be 98 episodes, and that's quite a lot. And I've always loved 3D modeling. I've always been interested in it. So that's why I chose it, was because I thought I can talk about this until the end of time. And I think in order to keep a long-term goal, it really needs to be something that's rewarding and interesting to you, especially to get you through those times where you're at the beginning and maybe you don't have as many views or as many subscribers or as many likes as maybe what you'd like to have. It's more important to enjoy the process. So even at those times when you're starting out and you aren't seeing that reward, it keeps you going just that you like it.
I love that. Especially you're so right. If you hate what you're doing, you're not going to enjoy it and you're not going to make something great. Outside of work, do you have like personal hobbies or anything like that you find that really help you kind of, disassociate from just work in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I do have a lot of hobbies. I enjoy doing Taekwondo, and I think that working out helps me focus better. It helps me get out any stress from working in general. It's good to have some kind of outlet in that way. And I also love the people in my Taekwondo class. I learned from a lot of them. They're incredible mentors to me just in life in general. So I really love that. Another hobby of mine is I like to do embroidery by hand. And that's really fun and relaxing. And it does help me get away from just staring at the screen all day, because I do stare at my screen a lot. So it's a nice way to give your eyes a break to do something by hand that doesn't require a screen. So I also do that. And then the third one I'd say is board games. I have a group of friends and we'll get together. We'll play board games like Wingspan or Arkham Horror. We also play Scythe, and that's really fun. So I feel like those are probably my three main hobbies.
Have you ever played, I think it's like Haunt on Hill House. I think it's that board game.
No, I don't think so.
Recommend. It's a lot of fun with friends. Essentially what happens is you go into a haunted house on the board game, and you have to collect items over a certain amount of turns. And then what happens is a hunt begins, and essentially one person is basically becomes possessed and has to hunt down the other people within the haunted house. Everybody else has to escape, and then you use the items you collected on the way through the haunted house to get out. It's a lot of fun, and there's over 100 different situations for setting up the hunt, that it always keeps you on your toes because you really don't know what's going to happen. I recommend. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That sounds like a lot of fun. I haven't tried that one yet, but it definitely sounds like something that my friends would also be into trying.
Hey, everybody, that was Leah Kopke, who is a fantastic 3D motion freelancer. Again, go check out her YouTube channel, Ambient 3D Animations. It is full of valuable information in regards to tutorials around Cinema 4D specifically. So make sure to go check that out. Leah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.